Now the first thing to know is which database to use to store data locally on a Flutter app, and SQLite and Hive are two of the very popular options. In this example we are going to use SQLite, so we are going to talk only about SQLite in this video. So how to add SQLite to a Flutter app? We have to use the package called SQLite. So go to the website pub.dev, search for the package SQLite and go to this page. On the tab installing, you will find the instructions to install this package on a Flutter app. Copy this line, this command, and execute this inside the root directory of your Flutter project. This will install the package. You have to open a connection to the database before performing any operation on the database. So here, for convenience, I am creating a new class named SQLite helper, and inside this class I am going to write all of the code related to the database. So we are going to create different functions for different operations, like to insert data to the database, and to fetch data, to delete data, and to update data, etc. So here, first of all, let's create an instance of the class database. This class belongs to the SQLite library, SQLite package, and we are going to use the keyword late to indicate that we are going to initialize it soon. We are not initializing it immediately here itself. Now let's create a function named open, and inside we are going to call a function named open database. This function belongs to the package SQLite, and this will open a connection to the database, and it will provide us an instance of the class database. We have to pass the path of the database. So as we don't have a database yet, so the path that we pass will be used to create a new database. Now here you can pass a complete path, but here you will notice that I'm only passing the name of the database file, and in this case the default directory where the databases are stored in Android or in iOS depending on the platform will be used, and there a file will be created for the database with this name. Now this function open database returns a future of type database, so we are going to use the keyword await to wait for its completion, and then we will be able to get the instance of database directly. So let's assign that to the variable database that we have created here. So await is used to wait for the completion of an asynchronous operation, right? And when you use await inside a function, then you have to add the keyword async before starting the body of that function. Now we have to create a table inside our database to store the data, right? So how to do that? Now there is a parameter called onCreate of this function open database, and to this parameter we have to pass a function, and this function is called if the database did not exist prior to calling this function open database. So this is the opportunity to create the required tables in the database as per our need. So if the database already exists, then this function will not be executed. If the database does not exist already, then this will be executed. So here only we are going to write the code to create the tables of our database. This function gets two arguments. First is the instance of the class database using which we can create a new table inside the database, and then the second is an integer representing the version of the database. There is another parameter of this function open database named version, using which we specify the version of the database, and through the second argument of this onCreate function we get that integer itself, the version that we specify using the parameter version. So inside this function we are going to call the function execute of the database instance, and to the function execute we are going to pass the query to create a new table. So in this case we are going to create a table to store the list of items, the shopping items, or you can use the same example to create a to-do list app. So you can consider this to be a table to store some kind of an item. So here let's name it items. Let's write the query to create the table, create table, then the name of the table, let's name it items, and then let us specify the columns of the table. So we shall have one integer named id, which will be the primary key. So let's write id integer primary key auto increment, so this will be automatically incremented every time a new row is added to the table. And then let's add a text named title to store the title of the item, and then we are going to add another integer named status, so this will represent the status of the item, whether the item has already been purchased or not yet purchased. So if we add 0, it will indicate that the item is not yet purchased. If it is 1, then the item is already purchased. We are not going to allow null values here, so let's add null, not null. So title text not null and status integer not null. Inside this helper class itself, we are going to write the functions to perform the different operations like inserting data to the database, fetching all of the items from the table of the database, then fetching one particular item by the ID, then updating one particular item, deleting one particular item, and deleting all the items of the table. So for this task, we are going to write the functions inside this class. Now to insert some data to the table of the database, we have to call a function named insert on the instance of the class database. So here inside this function insert, first of all we have to call the function open, because here we are opening the database connection and we are getting an instance of the class database. So we shall call it, and don't worry about duplicate instances, because the default behavior of this function open database is to return the same instance of the database, provided we are passing the same path. So we shall call the function open, and then we are going to call the function insert on the instance database. To this function insert, we have to pass the name of the table and then the value that we want to add in form of a map. So in this case, the name of the table is items, and here let's create a constant, because we are going to use this name in multiple places. So it's better to create a constant for the table name, and let us create constants for the names of the columns too. And now let us use these constants while creating the query for creating the table. So here let's use table name instead of this string items, and let's also replace this text ID, title, and status by the corresponding constants. Now here inside the function insert, we are going to pass the constant table name, because this constant contains the name of our table, right? And to the second parameter values, we have to pass a map containing the data to be inserted. So let us add a parameter to the function insert. So whenever we call this function insert, we shall pass a map containing the data. This function insert returns the ID of the row which has been inserted. So let us create an integer to hold the row ID, and we shall check whether the row ID is greater than 0 or not, because this becomes 0 whenever it fails to add the items. So it fails to add a row to the table, then it returns 0. So we shall check if row ID is greater than 0 or not. If it is greater than 0, then we are going to return true. If it is not greater than 0, then we shall return false, to indicate the status of the operation, whether it is a success or failure. So let's add the return type as future of type boolean, because this is an asynchronous function. We are using await here, and we are adding the keyword async. So this is going to return a future, and the type is boolean because we are returning either true or false depending on the value of row ID. And we also have to use the keyword await here in front of the function call open, because this too is an asynchronous function, and we have to wait until its completion, because then only we shall get a valid instance of database, because we are initializing this instance database inside the function open itself. Now how to fetch all of the items from a table of the database? For that, there is a function named query inside the database class. So we can use the instance database and we can call the function query on it. But here inside our function fetch all, first of all we have to call the function open, because inside this function we are initializing the variable database, right? So let's call open, use the keyword await to wait for its completion, and then we are going to call the function query on this instance. And to this function we have to pass only the table name to fetch all of the items of the table. So there are other parameters of this function using which we can customize our query. For example, if we want to fetch one particular item by the ID, then we can provide the values for other parameters which we are going to explore. But if we don't pass anything else and we pass only the table name, then we are going to get all of the items from the table, and this function will return a list of map. So let us create a variable of type list of map. Let's name it items to hold the result, and finally we are going to return this list from this function, and thus let us specify the return type to be a future of type list of map. Future because this is asynchronous, and list of map because we are going to return a list of map from this function. The individual map of the list contains the individual items of our app. To fetch one particular item from the table of our database, we have to use two additional properties of this function query. So here first let's add one parameter to the function fetch1, an integer, and let's name it id because we are going to pass the id of the item to be fetched. And inside this function first we are going to call the function open because this is going to initialize the database instance, and we shall use await to wait for its completion, and then we are going to call the function query on the instance of database. To this function query, this time along with the table name, we are going to pass values for two additional parameters. One is where and another is whereargs. So using the where, we have to specify the condition, and to the parameter whereargs we have to pass a list containing the values which will be used in the condition that we specify to the parameter where. So here in this case we are going to compare the value that we get through this argument to the column ID of our table, right? Because we are going to fetch one particular item of our table where the value held by the column ID is equal to this value that we get through this argument. So here to the parameter where we have to specify the condition in this way. ID equals to this, we have to add this question mark. So to the parameter where we shall pass the actual value which will be used in place of this question mark for comparison. So in this case let's use the constant call ID because we have created that to contain the name of the column ID, right? So let's use column ID equals this question mark, and to the parameter whereargs we have to pass this list, and inside this list we are going to pass this value that we get through this argument. So now while comparing, this value that we pass to the whereargs list will be used in place of this question mark here, and this function query in this case too is going to return a list of map, but this time this list is going to have only one item. So we are going to get that item using the getter first. So we shall call items.first, and this will give us the first and the only item in this case. So we are going to return that from this function, and the return type this time will be a future of type map. To update one particular item of the table, we should have the ID of the corresponding item, and we should have the new data that we want to add to the table. So let's add two parameters to this function update. First is an int, let's name it ID to hold the ID, and the second will be a map containing the data to be updated, to be added. Now inside this function we are going to call the function open to get the instance of database, and then we are going to call the function update on the instance of database. To this function update, first of all we have to pass the name of the table and then the data that we want to add, the new data. So let's pass this map, and then we have to pass values for where and whereargs. So using where we have to specify the condition, and this condition will be same with the previous one that we have used while fetching one particular item. So we are going to identify the item by the ID, by the value held by the column ID, right? So we are going to check that ID equals to this ID that we get through the parameter. So let's add the condition in this way, and then to the parameter whereargs we have to pass the list, and to the list add the value that we get through this argument ID. So this will be used while comparing using this condition. Now in the condition, if we have multiple such question marks, for example if column ID is this and some other value, if we are comparing multiple columns, then we shall have multiple question marks here in the condition, and we should add the corresponding values to compare inside our list that we pass to where args. So in this case we have only one, so let's pass the id to where args, and this function update returns the number of rows updated by this function. So let's create a variable of type integer to hold the number of rows updated, and if it is greater than 0, then we are going to return true, otherwise false. So the return type will be future of type boolean. Now let me show you how to delete one particular item from a table of the database. So we are going to delete one item by its id. So let's add one parameter of type integer to the function delete. Let's name it id. Inside, let's call the function open and use the keyword await to wait for its completion, and then we are going to call the function delete on the instance of the class database. To this function, first we have to pass the name of the table, and then we are going to pass the condition for selecting the item to delete. So we have to specify the condition using this parameter where, and we have to pass the value to use inside the condition to the list that we pass to the parameter where args. So this is similar to what we have done inside the update and inside fetch1 function, right? And this function delete is going to return the number of rows deleted from the table. So we are going to check if it is 1. If it is 1, then we are going to return true, otherwise false. And thus the return type is going to be future of type boolean. Now let me also show you how to delete all of the items from the table of the database. So we simply have to remove these two parameters. We don't have to pass values for these two parameters where and where args. We simply need to call delete on the instance of database, and we have to pass the name of the table. And here, if the number of rows deleted is greater than 0, we are going to return true, otherwise false. Again, the return type will be future of type boolean. Now let me show you how to fetch all of the items of a particular table in a particular order. So we often need that, right? For example, you may want to display the most recent items at the top of the list. So you will need to fetch the items in the descending order of the id. So we can do that with help of the parameter called order by of the function query. So we can add an optional parameter to this function fetch all, and then we can use it to pass the value for the parameter order by. But here, for clarity, I am going to create a separate function. Let's name it fetch all ordered by id, and inside we are going to call the function open again, and then we are going to call the function query on the database instance, and this time along with the table name we are going to pass a value for the parameter order by. So here we have to specify the name of the column by which we want to order. This is id in this case, and then the order. So we are going to fetch the item in the descending order of the id. So here we have to mention desc. This function query returns a list of map, right? So we are going to create a variable to hold it, and we are going to return that list from this function. So the return type will be future of type list of map. Now let me quickly show you how to use these functions that we have created inside the SQLite helper class. I'm going to use the example of a shopping list app, but you can apply the concepts to any other app. So here I have created a few widgets for the different components of the app. Here you can see that there is a file named item list. Inside this file we have the widget for displaying the list of items, the page for displaying the list of items, and then we have similar widget for displaying the details. Then we have a widget each item which represents the layout of the individual items of the list, and then we have another widget named add item inside this file add item.dart, and here we are using this widget to display a form to add a new item. If you take a look at the file item list.dart, here you will find the code to display the list of items, and here you will find this floating action button. So we have a floating action button on the list page, and here on tapping this button we are calling the function named add item, and inside this function I have written the code to display a bottom sheet. So a bottom sheet will appear from the bottom of the page, and there we shall display a text form field and a button to add a new item to the database. And here you will notice that we are returning this widget add item form from this builder function, and this widget add item form is responsible for the layout of that form. So we are displaying if you take a look at this file, add item, which contains the corresponding widget, you will find that we are displaying a text add to local DB, then a text form field, and then a button. Inside this button, we have written the code to add the item to the database. We are also displaying a loader, and for that we have created a boolean named showLoader initialized to false. Here inside the build function, while returning the widget tree, we are checking the value of this boolean showLoader. If it is true, then we are returning a circular progress indicator wrapped inside the widget center to display a loader. Otherwise, we are displaying the column. We are adding the column. So inside this column, we have a text widget, then a text form field, and the button. And here we have created an instance of text editing controller, which we are passing to the text form field, and using this text editing controller, we will be able to access the value entered into this text form field. Now inside this elevated button, inside the onPress function of this elevated button, first we are making showLoader true, and we are calling setState to rebuild the UI. So the loader will be displayed once the user presses this button, and then we are getting the text from the text form field using this controller. So controller.text gives us the text which is inside the text form field, and we are creating a map with the data to be added to the database. So here we are adding the text, and this is the name of the column where we are going to store the title, right? So the name of the column is title, and we are adding the key value pairs to the map where the key is the name of the column here. So for the key title, we are adding this text, and then for the key status, we are adding 0 by default, which indicates that this item is not yet purchased. So once the user changes the status, we are going to make the corresponding changes in the database. And then we are calling the function insert of our SQLite helper class. So we are creating an instance of this class, and then we are calling insert, and then we are passing this map containing the data to be inserted into the database. And as this is an asynchronous function, we are using the keyword await to wait for its completion, and it returns a future of type boolean, but as we are using await, we shall get the boolean directly, and we are creating a variable named added to hold the value that we get by calling this function insert. And then we are calling setState, and we are changing the value of showLoader to false again to hide the loader. We are calling setState, so the UI will be rebuilt and the loader will disappear. Now here we are checking if added is true. So if this is true, then we are going to call the function onChange of the widget class, and then we are calling the function pop of the navigator to dismiss the bottom sheet. So this statement will close the bottom sheet, and this is a function which is being passed to this widget. So if you take a look at the widget class, so this is a stateful widget. We have a state class and we have a widget class. Inside the widget class, we have this field called onChange, and we are initializing it through the constructor. This is a function, right? So while creating the instance of add item form, we are passing an implementation of a function to the parameter onChange, and this will be executed once the item gets added successfully to the database, right? So we shall call this function whenever the item gets added, the data gets added to the database, and inside the item list page we have the implementation. So when the data gets updated successfully, we are going to refresh the layout. We are going to fetch all of the items for the list so that the new item 2 gets displayed in the UI, right? And so here we have created a function refresh items. The implementation is inside this file item list, and we are passing it to the widget add item while creating its instance. And then inside add item, we are calling it whenever the item gets added to the database. Now let me show you how we are displaying the items on the UI. So we are using a FutureBuilder here. If you take a look at the build function of the item list widget, here you will notice that we have this scaffold, we have an app bar, we have some buttons on the app bar, and you will notice that to the body we have added an instance of the widget FutureBuilder. So this is a widget which helps us in displaying data from an asynchronous operation. So in this case, we are going to get the list of items by calling the function fetch all of our SQLite helper class, right? And that is an asynchronous function that returns a future of type list of map. And thus we are going to use this FutureBuilder to display the data that we get by calling that function. So to this FutureBuilder, we have to pass the future from which we are going to get the data, and we have to pass the implementation of a function which is responsible for creating the layout depending on the data that we get through the future. So here you'll notice that we are passing this variable future data to the parameter future, and if you take a look at this, here inside the state class we are initializing it. We are creating this variable and we are initializing it with the value that we get by calling fetch all of our SQLite helper class. We are creating an instance and we are calling fetch all, and the type is list future of type list of map, because this function fetch all returns a future of type list of map. Now inside the FutureBuilder, to the parameter future, we are passing this future from which we are going to get the data, and then we are implementing this function, this builder function. This builder function gets two arguments. First is the context, and second is an instance of a class called async snapshot. So we are going to get all of the data inside this instance itself. So this has a parameter called a field called data, from which we are going to get the data that the future provides us. So in this case we are going to get a list of map inside the field data of this instance snapshot, and inside this function we are checking if we are getting any error. If we get any error, then we are going to display the error message at the center of the page. Then we are checking if we have data. So if we have data, if snapshot.hasData is true, then we are getting the data from the field data of snapshot, and then we are using a list view to display the items on the UI, right? So here we are using this widget each item, which we have created for the layout, for creating the layout of the individual items of the list. And here we are passing the item, the individual map, to this widget, and we are passing a function refresh items to the parameter onChange. So again, inside the each item widget, we have the different buttons for deleting the individual items and for editing the individual items of the list. So whenever we make some changes to the items, then we are going to refresh the UI of our list page, and for that we are passing this refresh item to the parameter onChange. So we have seen this while exploring this widget add item, right? So we are doing something similar here. And if we don't yet have the data and we don't have any error, then we are going to display a progress indicator. Thus we are returning a circular progress indicator from this builder function of FutureBuilder. Now the options to edit and delete individual items is there inside this widget each item. So if you take a look at this widget, so here you will notice that we have an instance of the widget checkbox being passed to the parameter leading of the list tile. So using this parameter leading, you can display a widget at the start of the tile. So here we are displaying this checkbox at the start, and on tapping this checkbox, on changing its value, we are updating the status of the item. So here we are creating a map, and we are using this key status, which is the name of the column containing the status of the item, whether it's purchased or not. So if it is 0, it is not purchased. If it is 1, then it is purchased. So here we are going to check this value, and then accordingly we are providing appropriate value for the key status. And then we are calling the function update of the SQLite helper class. So we have created an instance SQLite helper, and then we are calling the function update, and to this function update we are passing the item ID and this map containing the data to update. So the item ID is there inside the widget class, which is being passed to this widget while creating an instance of the widget. So here we have this widget, thus we are accessing it using the widget reference, and then we are passing the map containing the data. And we are also changing the status here to update the UI. So we have to display the check mark, right, on the checkbox, and for that we are updating the value here and calling set state. And then we have the delete icon towards the end of the tile. So there is a parameter called trailing, using which we can display a widget towards the end of the tile. So here we are checking whether deleting is true. So this is a boolean that we are using to display a progress indicator. So once the user taps on the delete button, we shall display a progress indicator. And here we have created this boolean, we have initialized it to false. So initially the delete icon will appear. As we are checking here, if deleting is true, then we are displaying the progress indicator, otherwise the icon button. So this icon button displays the icon, the delete icon, and on pressing it, we are calling the function delete of the SQLite helper class. And we are also updating the value of deleting to true, and we are calling setState so that the loader appears. And once the deletion operation is successful, we are hiding the loader. So here again we are calling setState and we are changing the value of deleting to false again. Now here we are calling the function delete and we are passing the ID of the item, and this returns a boolean indicating whether the operation was successful or not, and we are creating this variable deleted to hold that value. And here we are checking if deleted is true. So if deleted is true, then we are calling the function onChange, which is being passed to this widget from the list page, and there we have the implementation for refreshing that UI, right? So whenever deletion is successful, we are calling this function. And when the user taps on one list item, then we are going to display the details of that item. And for that, here inside the onTap function, we are using the navigator to load the item details page. So to the widget item details, we are passing the item ID. And now let us take a look at the details page. So here we are initializing this field ID through the value that we get through the constructor, using the value that we get through the constructor. And inside this constructor, we are initializing this future. So we have created a variable of type future of map to hold the data that we get by calling the function fetch1. So we have created this function inside our SQLite helper class to fetch one particular item, right? So this returns a future of type map. For that, we are creating this field to hold that future. And inside this constructor, we are initializing it. We are creating the instance of SQLite helper class and calling fetch1, and we are passing the ID of the item. And here we are using a FutureBuilder to display the data that we get through this future in a similar way to what we have done inside our list page. So here to the parameter future of FutureBuilder, we are passing this future data, this variable future data, and then we are implementing this builder function. Inside we are checking whether we have got any error, then we are checking whether we have the data. So in this case, as the future provides a map, the field snapshot.data will provide us the map itself. So here you notice that we have created a variable of type map to hold the value that we get from snapshot.data, and then we are using the information that we have inside the map to display the title and the status on the details page. So here we have used the column and we have added two text widget to display the title and the status. And finally, we are returning a progress indicator which will be displayed when we don't yet have the data and we don't yet have any error. So in such a case, we are going to display a progress indicator. Now if you take a look at the app bar of the item list widget, you will notice that I have added two icon buttons here. So one is to sort the list or fetch the items in a particular order, and another is to delete all of the items of the table. So here inside the onPress function of the first icon button, which is for ordering the list, first we are changing the value of the boolean order descending. So here I have created a boolean order descending and I have initialized it to false. Now on tapping this button, first of all we are going to change it to true if it is previously false and to false if it is previously true. So here we are going to change the value, and then we are calling the function order by, and to this function we shall pass this boolean. So inside the function order by, first we are checking the value of the boolean. If it is true, then we are calling this function fetch all ordered by ID. So we have created this function inside SQLite helper class, right, to fetch the items in a particular order, in a descending order of the values held by the column ID of our table. And if it is false, then we are going to fetch the items in a regular way. And finally, we are calling setState, and we are updating the value of the future using which we are getting the data inside the FutureBuilder. So this time the UI will be rebuilt, and this time the future will get the data as per this condition, whether to order by the ID or not. And then we have another button for deleting all of the items. We have a boolean here, deleting all. So if this is true, then we are going to display a progress indicator in place of the delete button. Otherwise, we are going to display the delete button. So here inside the onPress function of this icon button for the deletion operation, first we are changing the value of deleting all to true, and we are calling setState to display the loader, and then we are calling the function delete all of the SQLite helper class. So we are creating this instance and then calling this function. We are using the keyword await to wait for its completion, and we are holding the value inside this boolean deleted, and then we are checking whether deleted is true, which will be the case when the deletion is successful. If it is true, then we are calling the function refresh items. So here we have created the function refresh items, right, to fetch all of the items again so that we get the new updated list. So this time all of the items will be deleted, so we won't have any item on our list page. And then we are making deleting all false again to hide the loader. If this video has helped you, then like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let's get connected on the comment section.